I gotta wait. How long I gotta wait for a press record?
Go.
Welcome to the stand, where Miss Dreme always has a story.
It's Dreme, and we got a season 2. Your Black Bostonian here, a product of a single mother who I work to make proud every single day. I'm a 3-degree holder, your veteran educator, your tech entrepreneur, and founder of the Chair platform. My platform is dedicated to supporting Black and Brown people on their hair journey by creating hairboards, connecting to hairstylists, and sharing haircare tips for a more joyous experience. My podcast is about sharing hair stories, educator stories, entrepreneurship stories, and stories surrounding identity with goals to leave you laughing, learning, and advocating. So come in and listen to the stories in the chair.
Where we share stories in the chair.
Hello, everyone. This is Wase. Wase, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Wase. I work in data science and have a lot of interests. My biggest passion is reading. And so I do love to read everything that's available, but also like to dance and kick it with my friends. So, yeah.
Wase and I met in college. We met, it was like the second day of first connection, and we were put in the same group, and we sat together on the train where we had to go explore different neighborhoods. Me and you were partnered together, and
Yes.
all I remember is us laughing on the train. I don't remember what we were laughing about.
I also don't remember. I remember there was a third person. I think his name was Jesse. And so all three of us were just kicking it, laughing, trying to figure out what all we were doing. Yeah. And I also remember it being one of the very first moments that I like immersed myself into like, hey, you're in college. This is what we got to do. This is away from home. Because if you remember, my mom was still around because my mom was hanging around because I'm the type to be like, okay, this was great. Let's go home.
And after that moment, when you start school, everybody's going off into their own worlds. And at that time, you learn that anybody who majored in bio, you never saw them again. And I was like, I'm going to see this lady. We became friends, so I want to make sure she doesn't disappear on me. And so I was always on the hunt to find you if you weren't in a lab. You majored, didn't you double major in the science? You were always in the science building.
Yes, I did double major in neuroscience and bio, though I was out there trying to do other things like English lit and music. So yeah, the buildings were not too far from each other. So I think I selected my area of campus and I was working with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
And Wase is definitely my birthday twin. And just like as she said earlier, she loved to dance. So we would always end up finding each other at some campus party and give a little 1-2.
Yes, and laugh while we were at it because we didn't take anything seriously enough to like make a good mood be wasted.
So you're a super doctor data scientist now, and I'm wondering, was data science always the goal for you?
Great question. I didn't actually grow up knowing data science, or even at the time we were in college, data science wasn't necessarily even a path. It wasn't an option at the school as a path to study. So I did know that I liked physics and bio. I liked physics for the numbers and I liked bio for the story. So I always knew that I wanted to do something with data. And I guess because I like science, having graduated, I fell into data science because I had a research background. So I did design experiments and analyze the data and model it. I always enjoyed using data to solve a problem. And that was the part that I liked about physics and bio, leading me to do a degree that was in biophysics. So I always did like the analysis part and trying to come up with a story from the data. And so I think that I became most aligned with data science, and turned out in this world we were going to be living in the age of big data, and it would be useful and applicable across different industries. So I guess I lucked out in that way.
What What is a story that you were able to uncover or create when you were learning about data science that you think about often?
Whenever I think of some of the stories I got to tell, so one of my favorite stories has to do with fertility. So I worked in a lab that studied the very early moments of fertilization. And so that was the moments from the sperm meeting the egg and having that activation to create an embryo. So not very common knowledge that that has to do with electricity. If you think of it in a physics context, ions and pluses and negative signs and that sort of thing. So to be able to use data, like to take the time it takes from whenever the sperm enters the egg to actually create the electrical signal that we needed to be able to say that that egg has been fertilized by the sperm, and whether or not it was a successful fertilization we would keep track of, like did it become an embryo that divided into multiple cells, or did it end up dying, and what did that look like. And so that was one of the most exciting things that I got to do in a pipetting and measuring electricity. Like we talk about an electric moment, but it was actually an electric moment. So I think that was one of my favorite data related stories. So the analysis that was needed here would be taking that story and taking all the data that was collected, because we collected the data at multiple data points per second, because that at the fertilization of an egg happens so quickly. And so taking that data that we got in terms of the time it took to be fertilized and time it took from entry to even like to signal the electrical signal we needed to see to consider it a successful attempt at fertilization. So I feel like even today, that's probably my favorite story, like being able to model that in data and tell somebody like, hey, these are things that are you need and how you optimize for that fertilization moment. We tested different chemicals to see what would make it better, what would keep the egg in optimal condition. If you kept an egg sitting out and didn't fertilize it for this long of a period, would it even be a successful fertilization? So like those were the kinds of things that I got to do, like collect the data and then analyze it and tell a story in a similar way that I do for my job in data science. It's just that this time I'm not doing the experiments to collect the data. The data come from everywhere, depending on the context in which the project is. It could be digital footprints, or it could be transactions if it's in the banking context, or it could be data sets that are put in PubMed for the NIH. So that's where my story with a lot more data begins.
So help me think about this in this really specific context to think about fertilization and electricity. What would be an even bigger story when all that research goes to hospitals, or when they're trying to explain what your research is to the general public?
Yeah, so in this context, the small question we were asking in the lab were like, what are the earliest important steps for fertilization to occur and for fertilization to be successful? So for us to understand what a successful fertilization looks like with the eggs that we were looking at, tells us we can use that information in the realm of fertility. When we think about the number of people that experience infertility and how they try to optimize and create opportunities for people to be able to be parents. And you can be parents in multiple ways, but also for people to be able to experience pregnancy if that is their preference. And so optimizing those conditions. And on the other side is if people were not wanting to experience pregnancy, today's society that looks like birth control. And so understanding, okay, what can you alter so that the egg doesn't get fertilized? And so that's pretty much in that context. So for battling against infertility, but also being able to have the information accessible to create birth controls that are useful for the people that prefer to take that route.
Where we share stories in the
Look, it's my commercial. We will be right back.
It's more than just a bad hair day. It's a journey.
Finding the right hairstyle isn't easy, nor is finding the right stylist or the right products. Looking in every corner of the web gets messy, overwhelming, and exhausting. All the ads, the articles, the products, the videos, it shouldn't be this hard, but it is. And now, it isn't. The Chair. A black and brown centered platform where you can design hairboards, connect to hairstylists, and share hair care tips for a new joyful path on your hair journey. Avoid the clutter, save yourself hours, months, and even years of research and poor trial and error. Everything you need and only what you need is in one place. Hairboards made by people like you, for you. Find the right products, the right people, the right answers for you, stress-free. Join the Chair community and make every day a great hair day. When you share your pain, you allow others to help you. And when you share your success, you help others get theirs. Lean on the Chair. We got you. No stress, no strife. In the chair, the chair, the chair. All right.
What is considered big data?
Oh, big data is, I would say, a lot of information. For example, if you go on a banking app and you go click this and that in a banking app, one could track those clicks and collect that information. And that is not just for you, but for other people. So it's like the amount of data that we're getting per second. It doesn't even have to be a banking app. It could be Instagram, right? The like button is translated into data. And that becomes the reason that you might see some stories versus others on your algorithm because of your activity. And so it's like we generate data so much now by being on the internet, or even whenever we go to the store or online and buy a lot of stuff on Amazon. There's a lot of data that's generated from those actions, making it make sense that your algorithm would be like, hey, you bought this, so here are other suggestions based on other people's purchases that also bought that thing. To be able to do that is to take a lot of data that other people have generated and then give somebody a useful suggestion off of it.
I spend a lot of time thinking about data in education. When we look at student work, that student work is data. How do you support kids in the classroom? How do you make better lesson plans? How do you make better curriculum? But then I also think about the question to ask. You have to ask the right question to get different types of data. Is that the same? Is that the same realm? Really thinking about the question you ask will alter the route you go?
Yes, I would say, for example, working in consulting, the state and local and higher education sector. So when we think about education, what that means is for that, the data that would be collected, yes, in the classroom level, that's one way to look at the data, but there's multiple classrooms, there's multiple children, there's multiple schools, multiple states, multiple teachers. All that is information. The reason that they collect data on student scores and all of these things and are able to allocate funds to some regions, for the most part, there's some data that would say maybe explain why some states get this funding versus that funding, or how they might decide to allocate it. And granted, the decision might not always be the one you think is the best one, but I guess I would argue that a lot of the data are there, even classroom data that goes up to become a part of bigger data from all of the schools in, for example, a region, and for all of the students at a particular level. For example, kids with disabilities, like some of those facilities that provide those services and the lessons and the teachings.
Yeah, because I was working at the Department of Education for Massachusetts, right? And it was always having these big conversations about collecting student data. But then there was the conversation of the racial component about people were choosing not to collect student data in certain neighborhoods or certain schools, or they didn't think it was as important. And then we were like, well, if you're trying to support kids with disabilities, if you're trying to support Black kids, or if you're trying to support ESL or ELL students, then all this data is important in how you ask the question to think about the type of data you needed to collect to be a better teacher, to have better supports. Do you think there's that conversation with Black data scientists, other melanated scientists?
Yeah, I think that that is an important conversation to have. I think the part that becomes tricky is that collecting data and analyzing it and turning it into something actionable is not in itself an isolated incident. The data needs to be collected by somebody, and the data needs to be put somewhere, and it needs to be housed somewhere, and needs to be quality checked. And so in my work line, whenever we are going to decide that we have a problem that we're trying to solve with data, there's a problem statement that is described, and in that problem statement we also go decide what data sets are we going to use. And so the caveat with data is also that you don't always have it the way that you want it, and it doesn't always look the way that you want it to look. And so sometimes you'll be limited because of that, because nobody's collecting it, or if somebody is collecting it, it's not in a way that's usable to be able to do something with immediately. And so it means having people and resources available to be able to do that. And do I think that we can do that if we design the teams to do that? I think so. But it's a matter of trying to figure out the best way to do it, and also having the funding to be able to do it. I just recently learned that the census intake over the years, starting from, I don't remember which year it started for the United States, they used to do it maybe, I guess, every several years. And the way that they were counting to get that data used to take them as long as it would take to get to the next census. And so like they kept on trying to optimize the way to collect the census data, which brings us to the age of computers. It also passes in IBM, which was the business machine. Like all these use cases to get to be able to analyze the data. If you think about it, way back then, our transportation systems weren't what they are today. The person collecting the data might have had to go door to door. So think about how they would travel going door to door and how they were counting. That you are ensuring that the counters are doing the exact same thing and putting it together, and assuming that after you collect those data, they are stored in a way that's accessible for the next person to come analyze. And so sometimes it may be that we have these data, but then there's not a pipeline and there's not a person who has identified that problem as the one that they are going to tackle and build the necessary team to be able to tackle it. And that's where it gets tricky. I think the country is often aware of a lot of these disparities and needs to do something about them. And it's just that I think sometimes what that might look like is where the problem is. The team you would need to create to be able to do that, the resources you would need to be able to fund it. And I don't think that that should be the reason that we stop either way. I just think that if somebody picks it up as their thing to do, it involves a lot more than, like, for example, if you go on Spotify to do a Spotify project related to data, you just connect to what they call an API, and then you can collect some data. But disparity data and deficiency data is not necessarily online. Spotify's online.
Oh, and if you're interested to learn more about my experiences as a Black woman and educator in Guangzhou, China, I wrote my first ebook titled Nowhere and Everywhere, Capture the Emotions of a Beautifully Broken Love Story. It is on lulu.com. Take a read and see some beautiful photography of mine. Enjoy the rest of the show. Play with me for a second. Let's say, so we're on the team together and we're looking at education data. We're specifically looking at kids with learning disabilities, looking at dyslexia. We have to think about the town that we're in. We have to think about the resources of the school. And I know I am a Black teacher, so I'm thinking about the disparities of how many Black kids are in this class, how many Latinx kids we have in this class. I'm thinking about ELL because that was my training, my background. I'm thinking about how many girls are in my class versus boys. Flirt with me here. Is this like when we're thinking about the organization of how we think about unpacking the data or collecting it or asking the right questions? Am I in the ballpark of what you mean when you're talking about designing a team to collect, analyze, and distribute?
Right. So at that point, you are, for example, in your role as the teacher, you might document those numbers for your class. And so if the business problem is associated with your class, then that data might be sufficient to ask questions and answer those questions specifically for your class.
Okay.
But if you want to answer those questions for the next class, and the next class being the class maybe a year from now, or the next class being another teacher's class, then you would have to account for those data as well. And then if we're going to take this to a level where we're trying to have impact, and we would have to design and decide what we're shooting for. So from the business perspective, whenever you have a problem and you come up with, you say you have all these data and you would like to solve it, we try to decide what is the outcome, the expected outcome, and can we, even with what we're looking at, come at that resolution? And if not, what is the minimum level we're trying to get at? And so the question here is, okay, so if you're saying you have kids with disabilities, and that's what we would want to take on at this point, or it could be multifaceted, but at the same time, not the solution to kids with disabilities is not necessarily the same for kids from backgrounds where minority backgrounds, whatever that might be described as. In our definition statement, we would want to describe what are we calling as a minority in Dreme's class. And if we're calling this group as minorities in Dreme's class, what do those data look like? And what is the question we're trying to ask? Are these kids who are described as minorities doing better or worse than the other students? And if we say that that's what we're asking, we want to define, what does it mean to do better or worse? Is better defined as scoring well in math and English, or is it defined as scoring well in everything as a percentage? And then what does it mean to score well in a percentage? What are those measurements we're taking? And what do those mean? Is it that I gambled and I lucked out that you as the teacher scored me well for singing a song in class in Spanish for a Spanish class, whereas someone else did not get the opportunity to sing in Spanish class and scored a different grade, but on paper, the Spanish grade is one and the same, and we're comparing it that way. So this is where like data quality also comes into play. Whatever we're looking at, like collecting data is one thing, but what do those data represent is another thing. For example, a credit score. If you have a credit score of 750 and someone has a credit score of 450, it does not mean that the person with 450 does not have 200,000 in the bank. If that's what we're using the credit score to check for in terms of who is more credit worthy. But because credit worthiness is a math formula based on these different factors, it doesn't necessarily have access to the money in your bank account.
Yeah, and it doesn't say that you're bad at budgeting. It doesn't include you're taking care of X amount of family members, or maybe someone used your name. Like, it's not including all of those things.
Yes, and that's where the school grading system also, I think, if you ask me, struggles, because what we're calling even gifted sometimes is defined by metrics that have been decided would be those kinds of things. And so I would argue that a student who is struggling with dyslexia could be gifted if you measured giftedness in a different way.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I test really terribly ever since I was a kid. SSATs, SATs, all the tests, GREs, all the things. I have 3 degrees, but if you ask me to take a test, I'm not going to do well. I know that about myself. So if I can avoid the tests and have to do for Lake Forest College where we went, I chose to do the optional interview instead. And I was able to show work experience and other coursework. There were all these other pathways to highlight my skill level and my commitment to higher education without having to be tested on an exam.
And so having those pathways does make a difference. And I hope that we are collecting those numbers to prove its importance. I do know that quite a few universities did take away some GREs and GMAT requirements for students, and in some cases, even the application fee for certain qualifications, because those are all barriers to entry for other people before you can even get to make it level in terms of an application, to even make it apples to apples, which I dare say is not possible. But to get as close as possible to apples, there's so many other barriers to entry. And right, your neighborhood, your zip code determines the type of school you go to and those kinds of things. And so after all of that, to come down to this one test that is supposed to determine whether or not you're good enough to get an education that your counterpart is going to get, is hard to appreciate, considering we talk about how we are supposed to be special and unique and all of these things. There's not a way to put that down to paper to say whether or not everyone can be compared at the same level. Are there places and schools that are saying, hey, this is what we're looking for and this is strictly what we want? Maybe. And so if that is clear that, okay, this is the type of job that we're trying to get you into and this is what it looks like. And people who are successful have typically done X, Y, and Z in these scores. And that's what we're saying. But we're also saying that's the typical thing. Does not mean that you yourself cannot do it. But we're also saying this is the typical thing. And so giving people alternative pathways. If there's a traditional route, some jobs have a traditional route and non-traditional route. So you could have the traditional route if that so pleases some of these schools, and a non-traditional route to be innovative, get other people who might blow your mind if you allow them to, actually.
Well, Wase, thank you so much for sitting in the chair and sharing your stories with me. I truly, truly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And as always, I'm happy to talk to you, twin.
Yeah. Yes.
Welcome to the chair, where Miss Dreme always has a story.
Thank you for listening to an episode of The Chair. I'm going to share with you a dream of mine. I would love to be on Sesame Street. Sesame Street held my hand through childhood. In my dream, I would be in my big afro or rainbow braids sitting on the stoop sharing hair stories. I would like your help, please, by doing all the things like leave a review, share it with someone who would benefit from hearing this episode. And if you know someone who knows someone who knows someone at Sesame Street, share your favorite episode with them and I'll make you some of my famous chocolatey hot chocolate. I hope you have a beautiful day, or if you are like me, still up in the middle of the night, I hope you take a deep breath and rest. Love you. Talk to you later.
Hello. Please leave a message after the tone.
Dream, hello. I just wanted to tell you you're wonderful. I just got through going through your podcast. Love you, love you, love you, love you. Keep it up. Maybe I need to send it to Oprah and Tyler Perry. Love you, baby. You are great.
Where we share stories in the chicken.